All right, we should be live here with Master Manculich. I'm going to wait a minute or two to let some people join, and I'm going to make sure we're coming through on Facebook.
Okay.
So just bear with me for a moment, sir. All right, we are on live with Master Bob Manculich. Master Manculich is one of our senior masters in Region 22 and has a lot of experience going back that I'm glad he's been willing to share with us today. So before I officially get started, if you'd just like to, any words or want to say hi to anybody, sir?
Just shout out to all the people in the World Tongue Stow Association, especially my friend, Master Robinson.
Yes, sir. All right, excellent. All right, then we'll start kind of how I like to start all these interviews. If you can just kind of go back and tell us kind of how and why you got started in the martial arts in general and Tongue Stow specifically.
Yes, I can. The fun part is knowing how much, I'm going back almost 50 years. So I always wanted to practice martial arts as long as I can remember. And unfortunately for me, you had to be 21 as a mature adult to have permission. Anything under that, you had to have signature of your parents. And my mom and dad told me, no. They said, when you graduate from college, you can do anything you want. You will be a mature adult and we can't stop you. So in 1973, I was a mature adult. First thing I did was I signed up and I started in Shotokan, and we were actually karate and judo. And we had one of the best judo clubs. I was I didn't do any testing in judo. I trained in judo. And so that was really a phenomenal experience. And I was very fortunate that being one of the best judo clubs, I was around some amazing people. And I'm just going to throw one name out real quick, Nori Bonasawa, who was All Japan champion, 6th-degree black belt way back when. He was actually the U.S. coach in 1980, which didn't happen, Olympic coach, because of Jimmy Carter. He canceled the Olympics, but he was one of our club teachers. I didn't train directly under him, but I trained under his students. So very fortunate to be around a lot of great people. So once I got started in Shotokan, it was great. Unfortunately, it was tough. We were under Okazaki in Philadelphia, and the Koreans were really, really, really wanting to make a footroad or an inroad in the United States. So they were doing things for free. So C.S. Kim and Yong Ki Hong and Master Yi, Master Yu, they were in Johnstown all the time, and they were there for us. And to get Okazaki Sensei in was a little bit expensive. So at some point in our maybe 2 years in, Master Goss decided to make the jump into the U.S. Tongue Stow Muda Kwan. And I think that was a good move at the time. We didn't like it, but without a doubt, it ended up good. And I always brag about my GUP number. I think it's 1,051. So yeah, back then they said if you were the first 1,000 people to join, you got a t-shirt. Little did I know that I got a lot more t-shirts.
Sure.
But so that's how I really, we actually, C.S. Kim and him, they hustled us. They thought we were a good studio. And so the rest is history, as they say. But that's where I got my start, really. That's how I got into Tongue Stow, U.S. Tongue Stow Muda Kwan.
So can you talk a little bit about how you got involved in World Tongue Stow Association more specifically?
Yes, another story, another C.S. Kim story here. So in 1985, C.S. Kim decided he wanted to join or create his International Tongue Stow Muda Kwan. Not internet, yeah, International Tongue Stow. And I was a 3rd-degree black belt at the time and one of the seniors. And he strongly suggested that I go with him. And I strongly said I want to stay loyal. And that didn't go over very big. So I did. They left. Mr. Goss and C.S. Kim went on and had a great relationship. And so I was sort of orphaned, and I traveled all around for a few years, training in different studios. I was a Ronin. So one of our master instructors, Joe Centrone, calls me that. But so at any rate, I was part of a very elite demo team, and when we were Shotokan, and there was only 4 or 5 of us, and we had a weapon set that was mind-boggling good, and it was so precise and so good. We got standing ovation. So back then, they did demos in between every championship, whether it be green belt, whether it be blue belt, whether it be red belt, it doesn't matter. There was some master's presentation. We were the only non-master group, and we were the only Caucasians too. So I got to be every weekend. We traveled. We were like a traveling road show. So I got to know everybody really well. And so I got to know Grandmaster Shin. So I called him in 1991, and he says, Bobby, he says, you come talk to me. And I did. And we had several interviews. And then I showed him my first, second, third dan certificates from the Korean Subak Do with Grandmaster Hwang Ki's signature in. It was all in Korean. And he said, Bobby, these are very special. He said, these are my instructor. This his signature. He said, this is good. And we always hit it off. But my journey there was because I didn't want to be disrespectful to Hwang Ki. And everybody was leaving at the time. But I wanted to go to someone that did train with Hwang Ki, and that was Grandmaster Shin, and who was tremendous to our family, tremendous to my son. He was like a father to us. So it was a great move.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So you mentioned a couple of times also Grandmaster Hwang Ki. Not a lot of people in our association anymore really had any experiences with Grandmaster Hwang Ki. And before we hopped on, you had mentioned a little bit of experience you had with Grandmaster Hwang Ki. If you could share that story with the group.
Absolutely. There was only 12 schools that he visited. So for us that remember the Korean Subak Do book, his first book that he wrote one in English and one in Korean. Okay. And in, I want to say 75, 76, because I wasn't a black belt yet, because I made black belt in 77. And Shodan, well, it was midnight blue back then. But at any rate, he came to our school in Johnstown, there's only 12 schools in the whole United States, and we were one of 12. And so all the Koreans were there, all the big Korean names. And so we did forms and, basic technique. And came time for a demonstration. And Puncho Huang, his son, I got to know really well because I was with him almost every weekend. And I told him I was going to break. And he said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to do a jump front kick. And so his dad did not speak any English. So he told him in Korean what I was going to do. And of course, then he says, Bobby, how much room you need? We clean out whole area, whole everything in the dojang. I says, no, I only need one step. And so I brought out a guy about 6'4", and I brought out another guy, man, he's probably about 5'10", sat on his shoulders. And the 5'10" guy put the board as high as he could above his head, holding it. It was about 9.5 feet. I bowed, paid my respects, took one step and jumped and broke the board. I was total vertical split, and I think I broke it with my toenail. I'm not sure what, but I was so afraid I wasn't going to break. And actually, that's the first time I did that break in public at that height. So adrenaline, fear, scared to death that I was going to mess up. And but that there was that. I will say one thing: Grandmaster Hwang Ki did sit up to watch me do that, because he was, watching our demonstrations, but that he put him up in his chair, so to speak.
Yes, sir. Awesome. All right. So can you talk a little bit about, I know you're in Johnstown, Tang Soo Do has been around there for a long time. Can you talk a little bit about how you started your school in Johnstown, Tang Soo Do?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. What happened was I had lost my job in the city, and political, and it's, you're an at-will employee. And so my wife knew, that I had taught for so many people in so many different areas and so many schools. And she just said to me, it's time you do this. And so her loving support and really her pushing was the one that got me to open up my school. And actually, I just celebrated June 5th of this year. So 1995, June 5th, was when I officially opened and I started Johnstown Tang Soo Do. So it's 25 years. And but it was through her encouragement that I did it. Prior to that, I was I was under the apprenticeship of Master Gary Josephic. I was assigned by Grandmaster Shin, and it was up to Master Josephic to recommend and allow me to open up the school, and Grandmaster allowed that to happen. So that's really how it got started.
Sir, thank you again. So we'll go a little bit about your experience and what you're known for in our association. Aside from being an excellent Tang Soo Do practitioner, sir, is your knowledge of Tai Chi and Chinese martial arts. Can you talk a little bit about how you got involved in that, your background, and maybe how that relates back to Tang Soo Do a little bit for our group?
No problem. It's kind of interesting. The circle here with, Grandmaster Huang Qi. So being that I was a senior, I think I was a red belt at the time, sitting there in the front, I got to raise my hand and we were allowed to ask a question. And so I asked, "Sir, what is your favorite form?" And of course, his son explained it. And he said, "Tae Guk Kwan," done. And I'm thinking, he's going to have the Chill Suns, which he created, and all these other forms. And I asked, what is the form he did every day? Tae Guk Kwan. Of course, they never said what it was. It was up for me to research and find out what it was. And it was Tai Chi, and Tai Chi Chun, actually. So that was, once I said, wow, what is this Tai Chi? And so the next point, there was a great book written by a guy named C.W. Nicole called Moving Zen, from white belt to black belt, of an American, his total experience as a foreigner learning a martial art in Japan, and being Shotokan, and all the teachers in there I knew of. So I picked it up and started reading it. So one day he was a brown belt in Korea, in Japanese, a Sankyu. So he was a Sankyu. So Sankyu, Nikyu, EQ, 3, 2, 1, then black belt. So he was a brown belt, and he was training in the mountains. And of course, Japan has tons of earthquakes. And so early in the morning, he's with his sensei, and the whole building they were in was shaking. He goes, "Oh, sensei," he says, "earthquake." He goes, "No, that's just Tai Chi instructor. He just punching building." I'm there, wow, what is this Tai Chi? So, of course, C.W. Nicole gets out and looks around. There's this old guy smacking the building, shaking the foundation. And so a year or two later, I got to meet my instructor, and I got introduced to him through a friend, and I was very nervous. My wife likes to tell this story. So we were in a Chinese restaurant waiting for him. So they brought the food out. I was so nervous that I ate all my food before I even knew I ate it. And I looked at her and I said, "Where's my food?" She said, "You already ate it." But anyway, so I got to meet my teacher, and he was a perfectionist, but he was a Xingyi practitioner. So I learned Xingyi, but he also was a sword player, Tai Chi sword. So in order for me to learn to play the sword, I had to learn to play Tai Chi. So I was doing both at the same time. And he was, again, perfection, like as in Shotokan. We were very much adhere to absolute total perfection in that technique. And so he would call me, and I would go to our meeting place, and he would show me a technique, and I would practice it, and then class is over. And then he'd show me at the end of that class a new technique. Now, I never knew when he'd call me again. And when he would call me, I would have to show him that new technique. And if I didn't practice it, he knew immediately. And so it was fun. Sometimes I would cheat, and he would say, "Bobby, come here, sit down by me." He says, "You want coffee or tea?" Because he said, "Class is done." Because I didn't do what he wanted me to do because it wasn't perfect. And he says, "Now, when you're done, you go home, you remember, I not show you, you remember what I showed you. Then when I call you, you make sure you do right." So the Tai Chi experience, the Xingyi experience, was all about perfection. And that's, I think, the hardest thing for us as Americans is we want to learn so many techniques. So one day I was bugging him. I wanted to learn the 108, which is Young style, longest form, 30 minutes. He stopped and he looked at me and he laughed. He says, "Why you want to do 107 movements bad? Why don't you learn one right?" He says, "Perfect one." He said, when you perfect one, then you go to two. He said, but right now, only one. And that's really, I think, where we're missing in a lot of our martial arts today, is we don't have the patience and perseverance to sit it out and absolutely learn the movement and perfect it. That's what I've learned from my teacher so far.
Yes, sir. Just something we didn't necessarily talk about ahead of time, but I remember a time that you and I had an opportunity years ago to teach Chang'an Idan to a group at a black belt camp, and I think we only got about halfway through the form in an hour because of that striving for that perfection. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I agree. A lot of people don't have the patience for that. So thanks for sharing, sir.
You're welcome.
As one of our senior masters, to me, you've always kind of been somebody to look at as a role model in terms of physical conditioning and keeping yourself healthy and shape and flexible. And so you talk a little bit about, how you do that and maybe the health benefits of Tai Chi and Qigong.
And I'll just throw in a slash yoga too. So I practiced yoga for 20 years. So yoga is an integral part. I mix it in all my stretches, but from a Tai Chi end, what I learned about is posture, structure, balance, and the most important thing that we all do wrong. And in my very first master's paper that I wrote was on breathing. I wrote 20,000 words on breathing. So people go, huh, that's a lot of words. I said, there's a lot of information. And so when you go back to the roots, especially the internal arts, Xingyi, Bagua, Tai Chi, especially Bagua, they have specific breathing exercises. And one of the, it's factual, I'll mispronounce his name, so I'm not. But in Bagua, they have recorded history of, they call it the ridge pole or standing meditation. This gentleman lived to be 250 years old, and it's documented. I have his name. You can look him up, but I'll send it to you. But so breathing and structure and how you hold your posture. And the nice thing about posture, because a lot of us don't know we're off balance. And you've seen me teach many a clinic where I walk up to someone and just touch them and move them. And I'll say, you thought you were in balance. And that usually gets them upset because it's usually a third degree. And they've got 20 plus years and they're moving effortlessly. And so we really don't think about posture as much as we should. And so in your spine and your breathing and, light fight or flight syndrome, everything to do with your heart and all your internal organs, all that, Qigong is all based on that. And so if you ever see an animal, and I like to think of a horse, a stud horse, and he sees a couple fillies, I can guarantee you that horse's head is up, his chest is out, and he's prancing. And that's about structure, self-awareness. And Tai Chi teaches you about self-awareness. So when you look at someone that's depressed, someone that's negative, their shoulders are slumped, their head is forward, and they're walking around just feeling miserable about themselves. So you can change a lot about yourself, your attitude about everything. It's just how you hold your body and your structure. And so that feeling permeates all through you. So you can make a difference just by how you hold yourself and your approach to class too. It's amazing. Structure. And that's what makes a difference in my health. If I was walking around saying how miserable I was, my head would be bouncing off the ground. So it's how you hold yourself, breathing, everything circulates around your circulation in your body. It's tough being 69.
Sir, you're going strong, sir, anytime I've ever seen you. So thank you for sharing. So going back to Tang Soo Do a little bit, can you tell me if you have any favorite areas of Tang Soo Do, whether that's a particular subject area or a weapon or a form or something else in Tang Soo Do?
Going back old school, I got to say, forms were created for lack of training partners. And so therefore the master instructor or just some senior would show you technique in the form and you practice it, because when I practiced Shotokan, we had to know and understand every movement, what it meant, how to use it. And our teacher, when you were doing a form, would surprise you with a board. And as you were about to punch or kick, he'd throw his board up and you had better broke it. And if your technique was weak, you were in a lot of hurt. And so focusing on forms is probably one of my greatest, whether weapons or, hand technique. And I tie it all in, you bring it all back together. So it's all about fighting. You have to see your opponent. And one of my favorite stories is first World Championships, 1994. I'm a third degree, nervous, haven't done, when I was in the U.S. Tungsten, I was at the top of the chain, so to speak, and fighting for grand championships and winning. Now I'm starting all over again, old. And so my wife asked me, did you watch yourself do your form? Did you video yourself? And I went like, no, I got this. In my head, I thought I was Bob Manculich in the 1980s. Far from that. I was horrible. I was depressing. And so she videotaped me and she says, what does that look like? I says, bad. In fact, Master Khan, the low score was a 7. He gave me a 6.8. That was good. Really gave me a kick in the pants. She goes, you didn't see any enemy out there, did you? I went, I didn't see anything. She goes, you got your butt kicked. I went, yep. So that was always a great lesson from my wife for me. She goes, you got to learn to look at yourself. You got to videotape yourself. You got to see, and if you talk to a Brian Fisher and Master Fisher, when he was on the top of his game, he would be in front of a mirror just doing a move hundreds of times to see if it was right and perfect. And that's something we have to get back to. Is it right? Do you see your opponent? Are you? And forms does that. So for me, I don't really. I love self-defense from a Tai Chi perspective, but as far as weapons and forms, I love forms. I love them because of the fact that you are fighting your invisible enemy and you're perfecting your technique. And I still haven't gotten it right yet, so I'm still working on it.
Yes, sir. I think we all say that to some degree, but going back, it might be too modest, but I know for me, I have been one of those Samdans and even masters that Master Manculich has just come up and touched and knocked me off balance really easily. So you've always done a really great job of taking the applications of movement, of forms, of posture, everything you've talked about, and put that into practical self-defense situations. So can you talk a little bit about maybe your personal philosophy on self-defense and how you teach it, and maybe if it's any different for children and adults?
Well, I'll just throw out one caveat on the children. I don't separate children and adults as I look at them. However, when teaching kids self-defense, I look at their maturity and I really stress that what we're learning can and possibly could seriously hurt the person that might be attacking you in the street. And I want them to know that, look, you're excited about learning something in martial arts and you can't wait to go home and show your friends. A little bit of ego here, and you want to show them how it works. I said, but my experience with friends is sometimes they become your enemies. And so now everything you showed your friend, who's now your enemy, may use it against you. So I really try to put it in the back of their head, don't show anybody. And your best weapon is that whoever you're fighting do not know what you know. And you always keep that you have something special. They don't know what you know. And that's your best avenue of defense. As far as my concern on self-defense and application, again, it's back to my Shotokan days and everything that they really pounded into us, quite literally. And, inside block, outside block. And our goal was never, ever to use it as a block. Our goal was to use it as an attack. And so how would I say this? Not encourage you to attack me anymore because you can't use your limb. That is a great day. And so when we did an outside forearm block, and we used to practice in horse stance, you were just my fist away from me, or myself away from you. And it is a high blocks, high punch, center punch, low block. And you did high block, inside block, outside block, low block, knife hand. And my goal was to hit you. And your goal was to block. And if you didn't block, I hit you. And that's just the way it went. And I was an accountant. I worked in a public accounting firm, and I had lumps on my arms. And I couldn't even put my arms on a desk. I would have to ease into the pain in order so I could write. But I knew my block worked. And I knew everything about it. And I think that's where we have to see it. I don't do any hard blocks. Like if I hit you with a hard block, I can guarantee you it goes right back from 50 years ago. I'm going to hurt you. And most of the stuff is soft now as you age. Everything is just redirection. And obviously from a Tai Chi and joint locks, Chi Na, I studied Aikido for years. A lot of people don't know that. And so taking and joint locking somebody is great. I mean, you put a lot of pain in them instantly. I love it. To me, that's fantastic. So knowing your form, knowing why you're using it. If you can't see that opponent, you cannot use your technique effectively. And when I watch forms, and I know people have seen me put my hand in my face because I can't look at it anymore because they're not fighting anybody. That's my hardest part. And, and I remember my first test sitting there scared. And, and in our system in Shotokan, it was every 6 months. And you never, ever ask the teacher. If you ask the teacher, has another 6 months added on. And I remember we had to get up. We started with forms. We didn't do technique. We started, at forms. And I remember, when they told us to come together, Shizentai, and we had a turn. I remember everybody, all but one or two, not failing. And they failed immediately because they didn't turn their head. And the instructor says, how do you know what you're doing if you don't turn your head? He told everybody sit down, but 1, 2 people, rest, sit, you're done, you failed. See you in 6 months. So it was all about discipline, and perfection. And you have to see your opponent. If your head don't turn, how do you know what you're doing? And so that to me was ever, I remember just shaking like a leaf. And so, I know what it's like to sit and wait because I didn't do what I was told to do. But so for me, I love self-defense. I love joint locks. I love China. Because you get older, you have to redefine, and I'll get back to the other thought, because we had his name is John Farrell, Sensei Farrell. His first black belt was in Tung Sudo, but he left and became an inside disciple of Maso Tatsu Oyama, who was originally Korean, but killed a man, went to Japan, changed his name to Maso Oyama. He was a guy that liked to punch a bull and kill it. So he created the Kokushinkai style. So he used to come and train with us all the time. And Sensei Farrell was a great influence in my life on focus and perfection. Again, their breaking skills were phenomenal. And so when we were in Johnstown at Pitt, CS Kim loved to have his UPJ just built their gym in, I don't know, 77, 78. And Sensei Farrell said to me, Bobby, there's master demonstration today. Go find me a rock. I went, it's February and it's clay out there and it's like rocks frozen. He goes, go find me a rock. I'm out there in my dobok. I found a little like Lucky Stone, and I was chiseling a rock out of the clay because clay's full of water and it was frozen. I dug it out. I had it in my hand. I had this 6-inch rock in my hand and I brought it to him. I says, Sensei, here's your rock. He goes, oh, Bobby, thank you. And I was like, oh my God. And so he cleaned it up. And so when it came for demos, CS Kim did his famous stuff. There's Sensei Farrell in the middle of the arena, throwing a rock in his hand, playing with it. And he just did a knife hand chop and broke it in half. I went, that's my rock. And to see his kind of intensity, and his focus, and what I got from Maso Oyama, because one punch kills, and that's how we did our technique. One punch kills. We weren't into all this multifaceted stuff. We designed, and of course, Maso Oyama was famous for punching. He had a theory, and I'll get to my Chinese instructor here. You go in the woods and find a 1-inch tree, and you punch it every day until you kill it. Then you go to a 2-inch tree, and you move up. And so, we were big into the Makiwara Taliande, and so all of us, our hands looked like whatever, big calluses on them. And so we were big into punching, and CS Kim loved that. And so to hit and break things was we just Shotokan. We was just like, we were all in on all that. So when I don't know if today's people would want to just sit there and hit the Taliande 100 times and just smack it and smack it. That's before class started. Then you went out and trained. And we used to do knuckle push-ups on roofing towel. For those that know what roofing towel is, it hurts. And then we used to actually punch the roofing towel as we did our push-ups. So our hands were, we were brutal people, and we loved to hit and we loved to break. And so with Masayama's theory on punching a tree, so my Chinese instructor, he was very upset with me. He saw where I was going. I was hard, hard, hard. And so one day he says, Bobby, how many times you punch? Focus. I said, 1,000 times. How many times kick? 1,000 times. He says, it take you 999 times to hurt person. He says, what's wrong with you? He says, I have a friend, Kokoshinkai, in Taiwan. Every day he go into woods, he punch tree every day. One day he no come out, tree live, he die. So that changed my philosophy about focus technique. You only have to focus it once. You know what I mean? You don't have to focus it thousands of times on on our joint destruction. So you asked me why I'm still moving, and it was because of that. And so the other thing that we did, I don't know, did you ever punch a candle out, punch the flame out?
I have. It has been a long time, but
so for us, that was common. So the thinner, the smaller the candle, the easier the flame. The thicker the candle, the bigger the candle, the bigger the wick. So when my son Jude was very young, for his birthday cake, he started when he was 3, and so by the time he was 5 or 6, he was back fisting his birthday candles out, and so he used to impress everybody at the birthday parties. But so that was big for us. But what that taught us was focus. We had to create that vacuum around that flame, and it went poof, and you had to see that poof. We didn't blow it out. You didn't knock it out. You created a vacuum around that flame. And so for us, focus technique, not even 1 inch from the face. So when we practice our punching drills, we were punching as hard as we could to your jaw, full focus. And trust me, you had total belief that I wasn't going to hit you. And we don't have that kind of control anymore. We practice that day in, day out. That was something we practiced. We used to line the candles up on our punching wall, and we would just stand there and punch and punch, and we'd do reverse punches, knocking out and lighting the flame, locking out, lighting the flame. Sure. And the last thing you wanted to see was wax on the wall behind you, because that means you hit the candle.
Yes, sir. Some great stories, sir. So again, not something I've thought of ahead of time, but something I thought of just as you were talking, you touched on a little bit. So you have experience in both, the Okinawan Japanese, quote unquote, hard styles, as well as the softer styles. Can you talk a little bit maybe about how somebody who's, like you said, hard all the time can bring some of that soft in, or maybe even the opposite of how somebody who's too soft can bring some hard?
I think that's a great question, because Grandmaster Shin assigned me my topic, of Tung Sido and Tai Chi. And I had to research it. It was a research paper, actually. And I had to start back to the inception of when everything started. And I had to bring it all together and tie it in. And so what I found out as I was going through all the Japanese and Okinawan martial arts, being I was diehard Shotokan man. Of course, Funakoshi started Shotokan in probably 29. He was Okinawan, and they considered him a historic, or he was listed as something of high importance there. So Okinawans and Japanese did not get along, not at all. So he had a position of stature. So he started teaching in the schools there. And Masatatsu, or I said his name wrong, but Nakayama Sensei became his successor after Funakoshi died. And another great Japanese instructor, Kanazawa Sensei. If you've seen Kanazawa, he was the absolute picture of someone who ate, slept, and drank martial arts in every muscle striation. So when he did a punch, every possible fiber in his body was focused. And so as I was going through 1957, 1958 articles, I found both Nakayama Sensei and Kanazawa Sensei studied Tai Chi, which was absolutely mind-blowing, because I never knew that. And of course, they never said it to the public. So the neat story about Nakayama, when Funakoshi Sensei sent him over there, he wanted him to basically learn Chinese martial arts and bring something back, also on their philosophy and maybe some secret techniques, so to speak. And so also Nakayama Sensei his family was Kendo. So he was a champion swordsman. And so when he went over there, he was feeling his oats and feeling bad and said, man, I'm the cat's meow here. And he said one day in the street, somebody challenged this old guy, really old, diminutive guy. And he said, this old guy just shattered this guy's arm without even, he goes, looked effortless. And he said, it was an old Tai Chi instructor. And he says, I rethunk my ideas about how good I was. And so he says, I immediately put aside all my thinkings and I became a beginner over there. And he learned, Chinese martial arts and meditation and Tai Chi. And so a neat story about him was, and I'm getting to where I want to get to, internal and external. He was a great skier and they ski in Japan. And he was in an avalanche. He was buried to death. When they uncovered him a day later, they gave up on him. They didn't think he was alive. When he woke up in a hospital, the first words he said to him is, I'm hungry. And they were like, you should be dead. And he says, I knew I was in a bad situation. And I went to my Chinese instructor's teachings on breathing. And I basically put myself in a hibernation state. I was hibernating. So fantastic story. So the two kicks that he brought back from China that he, just so I don't want to leave it, he brought back a front push kick or a stomp kick, and he brought back pichagi, inside outside. So those were the two kicks that he brought back from China. So Kanazawa sensei, who was, I'll say, the poster child of their forms. They had Nishiyama and they had Okazaki, who's in Karate Do Kyohan. That was the last inside disciple of Funakoshi. However, Kanazawa was their poster child for forms. He in his interview, he says, no one knows I studied Tai Chi. He goes, external, 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 not good for your body. He says, so in order to understand, he goes, if you live in a house, you know everything about your house. He goes, however, to know more about your house, you have to step outside and see what you have. And then you can appreciate it more when you study something else. Then you go back inside. And he said from the external hard style martial artist that he was, what he found out was external eventually figures it out that you must become internal. He goes, that's where you got to go. So if you think of Grandmaster Shin, and in my beginning talks with him when I first started, what was great, he knew I practiced Tai Chi and Shingi, and he was just getting into the Qigong, and I don't know if you were ever at Millersville, but I was the first person to teach meditation other than Grandmaster Shin, and I taught it at Millersville, to be quite honest with you. But he was moving there, and Grandmaster Shin took a lot because he was a hard style martial artist, and it took a while for him to figure out, you got to get to the internal end. So I'm just getting two perfect examples of two hardcore Japanese Shotokan karate people, Nakayama and Kanazawa Sensei, Tai Chi practitioners, and of course our own Grandmaster leading the way and getting our system and seeing the values and actually the health aspects of it. Really, it makes your joints better. Let's put it that way.
So there's a question on Facebook kind of related to the health aspects, and she's kind of segue into that. So what exercises have you found have been either helpful or maybe hurtful as you've gotten older? So are there any exercises that are good for you, or maybe things that we shouldn't be doing that are bad for us?
I would say focus kicks probably, and not trying to jump up and kick at 9.5 feet anymore. No, I stay within yourself. I think as you get older, you have to decide, most fights, being a bouncer in a bar for 12 years, most fights are all, you're not doing anything fancy. It's all joint locks and how you can manipulate, or actually it's all mental. No fight becomes physical unless it becomes mental. So if you can control it mentally, it's almost like Obi-Wan working with the little sand guys, And so I hate to say it, it's you actually controlling the situation. No one knows what you know, and I never really had to work hard at getting in someone that was full of a lot of stuff in a bar out. It was amazing how easy it was to get them out. And it's because I used my mind and not wanting to get in and show everybody what I know. It's how you get them out. Patrick Swayze says all fights are outside, and in his famous bar scene there, as he was a bouncer in a bar. So yeah, but I would say focus. Don't worry about focus kicks or punch. Now, that's the hardest thing, because we're always trying to demonstrate something really hard. I would say have a younger person maybe demonstrate. You can do it slow, but structure and posture and breathing. Breathing is my key to life. I've gone back to my basics. I've gone back to my Bhagavad training and breathing. And there's so much to it. And the energy that you create and you're flowing, I think that is where it's all about breathing, really, when it comes down to it. And Grandmaster Shin worked on it. He talked about it. The Qigong exercises. How I remember the first time he stood up on a table in front of 1,000 people, and he's standing there, and everybody's looking at him as he's doing these exercises, and everybody's trying to go, really? Is this serious? And he was that serious. He was able to come down off of this. He's the Grand Master, and he's doing things that look maybe foolish or simple. And finally, everybody clicked in and says, he's doing it, we're going to do it. And so I would say breathing. If you can understand breathing, man, that is the key to life.
Yes, sir. So talking about Grandmaster Shin a little bit, I know as our association continues, there's a lot of people that unfortunately didn't get a chance to know Grandmaster Shin. Are there any stories? I know coming up through Region 8, we had a lot of time with Grandmaster Shin. Are there any stories or experiences or anything that you can share kind of about yourself and Grandmaster Shin?
He was a father to me, really. He was great. He was a father to my son. He loved my son dearly. Grandmaster always made it a point to find my son and talk to him and sit down next to him, and made him feel special. And in Region 8, the very first student of the year was my son, and that was because Grandmaster Shin picked him, and he loved him dearly. And his love of children. When I was in China with him in 1995, when I went on that expedition, what I learned from him there was invaluable. How to handle a crowd, how to be around dignitaries, how to carry yourself, structure, how to control the room, how to control the conversation. If you don't want to answer something, you don't. If you want to just, Tai Chi, like in Russian fighting martial arts, another thing that I studied, it's all Tai Chi, believe it or not. And it's one of the most deadliest systems I ever got humbled by, literally humbled. And it's about turning the aggression, and you can do it with your mind. And Grandmaster Shin was outstanding at that. So when I was in China and we were in some situations that were kind of squirrely, and he just absolutely the total diplomat, and how he was able to walk through that, get us out of it, and move forward. Just loved it. And anytime a kid was around us, any child, any little Chinese kid was around us, Grandmaster Shin would find some little kicking pad, and he would have it, and he would hold it, and he'd have that little Chinese kid kicking the pad, and he'd go higher, higher, and the little kid would be trying his best, and he was loving it. He was a child. You had to see him just love children. They flocked to him. He was like the Pied Piper, man. He was there, and he loved it. I loved his smile. I loved how infectious he was. He just brought out the best in you, and a lot of times, I didn't want to do something. He goes, Bobby, he goes, no, he goes, I think you should do this. Next thing I know, I did it. So he had a big influence in my life. He was a great father figure for me. And I'll be honest with you, when I left Jogas CS Kim, because I was in their stable, I was one of their top fighters, and for me to leave them and go and stay with Huang Qi was very tough. And it was life-changing for me, because I was there with them. I was there every weekend, and I did everything they ever asked me to do. And, and Grandmaster Shin never, ever once made me regret the day I left, the U.S. Tung Sado, or looked behind and saw Jogas and CS Kim in a rearview mirror. Never once did I ever regret that decision. He was the best thing that ever happened to me. I really thought I understood martial arts. Honestly, I was only beginning.
Sir. So, excuse me. Talked a little bit about the China expedition. I remember you talking a little bit about that in the past. I wasn't 100% sure that you'd been on one of the China trips, but I was fairly sure, so I didn't necessarily ask about that. But I would like to ask about that now since you brought it up. Is there anything more you can talk about that experience of going to China as a delegate of our association and kind of what those trips have meant to our organization?
Yeah, I think, from a martial arts perspective, obviously China has a lot of roots. Japan, like Aikido and Tai Chi look very similar. And so when you think about Yeshiva Sensei, the founder of Aikido, they said he made a lot of trips to China, and so there's a lot of similarities, a lot of joint locks. So when you look at how they all interchanged, they all shared information, but they weren't trying to take each other over. But going to a place that had a long history of martial arts was something I was looking forward to. The fact that I had a Chinese instructor was great. He gave me, actually, which was even neater, he gave me a letter of introduction. So when I learned the sword, I learned from his teacher. And his teacher was at Beijing University. And when we went to Beijing University, they were basically on, we'll call it like a holiday. They could use the word holiday. So I gave my letter of introduction to our interpreter. And he's also in the World Tung Soo Association. And I was trying to meet my teacher's teacher. And unfortunately, he wasn't there. So I had a lot to look forward to a little bit, but I watching their perfection. So when you walked in, I remember, it was in Dongfeng. It was outside where the Shaolin Temple was. Dongfeng has a big martial arts school, 4,000 or 5,000 people. They drop them off at 3 and they graduate when they're 18. And they're all in a straight line. And they're out on a hard clay field, hard clay. And no stones, of course, because they sweep it. It's clean. They sweep their clay. And we're standing there in our uniforms. And their lines are perfect. And they only had about a dozen instructors. And I remember just hearing a little command. You had to strain to hear it. And they all moved in absolute perfect sequence. So I was blown away. I says, man, I can't get 10 kids to do that. They got 4,000 kids doing that. I'm totally impressed. So we ate dinner that night with the head. He was a Columbia University graduate, so he spoke English and, well, of course, Chinese fluently. And he had just finished a 5-book set. He gave only 5 books to the temple. And he gave 5 books to Grandmaster Shin. We could buy 3 of the 5, but we couldn't buy all 5. Grandmaster Shin didn't want us to buy them. And we said, okay, we didn't ask. He just says, don't buy them. But I asked the question. I said, sir, I am impressed on your discipline. I said, you got 4,000 students doing all, they did like a low block punch kick. It's basically wushu position. I said, all at the same time, how do you do it? He said, discipline. I said, how do you discipline them? He says, if they step out of line, we just call them over in a room and talk to them. I chuckled. I said, is that all? And he didn't say anymore. But, those experiences of watching their technique. And so we got to perform for Beijing University, and we got to perform in a lot of areas. We got to perform in front of their world wushu team. And these people were phenomenal. And so the day before, we watched this one kid just do a straight back kick. Part of his form, it was just a straight back kick, and he punched with his 2 arms forward, and it was a straight back kick, just part of his form. And I watched him do it. And of course, when we were there, the temperature was well over 100, it's 105, 110 every day. And we're in a gymnasium with about 120 degrees. And of course, they do not have Western style commodes. So you typically might have had sanitation running through your rooms. And so it was rough, but these kids were training in tremendous, in a tough situation. This kid did this kick for over an hour, perfect. And the next day when they were in their uniforms and they got to come out and do what we watched in practice, it was perfect, and so that's what one of the things that just got back and keep reinforcing back to me. They were in very inhumane conditions. No one complained, no one moaned, and yet every one of those kids were perfect. And I was amazed at their perfection. And so Grandmaster said something to us. He said, no, remember, don't get intimidated. He says, we're karate and they're Chinese, they're wushu. He goes, at some point, a lot of these people are chefs. We're the cooks. The cooks don't teach the chefs. He says, but we're not taking a back seat. Just keep everything in perspective.
Interesting. Thank you. Some great stories. You've had some great history of all kinds of stories of different martial arts and martial artists. So I appreciate all of that. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how maybe you think martial arts in general, or even Tang Soo Do, has changed over the years, either positive or negative?
My big word of the day is perfection. I like to think of myself as first generation. Okay. And I have a little analogy I always use. So every student that I might have taught, maybe say I held back a couple of percentage points. And every student, that if they become a black belt and they teach, hold back a couple percentage points. So I'm working on 5 generations here. So if we just do 10%, so whoever is my 5th generation black belt is now holding back, or the most they have is 50% of my information. And it's kind of tough. So I always look at who were the first generation. I got to train under all the people that just came from either Japan, Okinawa, servicemen. I got to train under a guy named Mike Dignan, who was not only was the All Japan champion in judo, Okinawan champion in judo, but he was also All Japan champion in karate, or Okinawan champion in karate. So his attention to detail and perfection was amazing. And he was only a first degree black belt, but amazing. So again, we're in a hurry. Back then, there was no hurry. He was only a first degree, but his technique was impeccable. You know what I mean? So when you look at these people and what they brought to the table, and none of us, books weren't around, DVDs, CDs, none of that stuff existed. Remember, 8mm, if we were lucky. And so, this is karate by Masoyama, Karate Do Kyohan by Funakoshi Sensei, couple books, mostly all in Japanese. When Huang Qi came out with his book, was like, woohoo, that was 1978. So you got to understand, there was very little information out there. And so all of us that trained under, I call them first generation martial artists, I like to believe, they always say the tree and the fruit and how far it rolls down. I like to think I fell next to the tree. Some of us might have rolled all the way down the hill, and that's where we might be right now. Some of them, the apple's pretty far down the hill. So I like to get back to basics, and I think we're in a rush. It's all about, can you perfect it? And I love my Chinese teacher, Bobby. Why do you want to do 107 techniques wrong? Do one right and perfect it. How do you know you perfected it? And that's the key question. Do you? Do you really know? Can you put that, like an inside block, outside block? How many situations can you put yourself in and use it effectively? When I watch people blocking, again, I sometimes put my hand in my face, and that's not professional. And I have to sit tall and look into the crowd and bite my tongue. But can you block with that technique? That's really the answer. Can you use it? And that's where I see the difference. Going to class, someone punching as hard as they can to hit me, and I'm blocking as hard as I can to stop it. And if we did that today, it's called lawsuits. But I really believe I knew my technique worked back then versus today. I think there's a lot of self-doubt. I think a lot of people are not sure. And so they don't want to get in that situation. So as a bouncer in a bar, I never once questioned whether I could do the job. And they used to always say, people would come in and say, who's the bouncer? And they'd say, that little skinny guy over there. And they'd go, really? That little guy? They go, yeah, just don't piss him off.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So you talked a little bit about how some people do have doubt or self-doubt. Is there any point in your martial arts career that you can remember being presented with a particular challenge that might have slowed your progression or even threatened to stop your training in martial arts? And if so, kind of talk about how you got through that.
Never stopped it. I was a scared chicken fighting. Thank God I was a great track star. So I was able to run like hell. And so at Goss's, he got very upset with me. So everybody beat me up. everybody knocked me around, and I was just gutless. So he put me in a corner of the room. You have 4 corners. And he would say, all right, you have to fight out of this corner now. He says, you ain't getting out of that corner unless you get out of that corner. So I trained by being stuck in a corner, and people were trying to kill me. And I had to get out of that corner. And eventually I wasn't in that corner anymore. And eventually I became the person standing at the top of the stands. So I learned a lot. It was a tough love, but I was afraid. I was definitely afraid. And there's no doubt in my mind, I was afraid of getting hurt. And fear is our biggest problem right now. So how do we get over fear? And I think whether somebody has a knife, a gun, a club, and so in your mind, what's the weapon? Is the person a weapon, or is the knife the weapon? You have to decide that the person is the weapon. You have to diffuse the person and not the knife. You have to look beyond that. And that's where it has to go. And so in our training, when I was getting beat, I had to look, it's not about winning. In Aikido, when I studied in Aikido, Yeshiba Sensei says, you look at you have Uki and Nagi. Nagi is an attacker. Uki's getting beat up on a little bit. You say, I love you. And he says, look in the mirror and make a face of hate and make a face of love. One is relaxed and one is tension and constriction. In Aikido, there is no tension and there is no constriction. He goes, so that's why they don't have tournaments. It's all about being relaxed. The more relaxed you are, the better you are, the more spontaneous you are. So if it comes down to winning and losing, you're going to be tense and constricted. You cannot have, the Japanese had a saying called Mizuno no kokoro, mind like water. So if you had a tub of water and you dropped a stone in it, you had concentric circles. Those are thoughts. The Japanese wanted your mind to be like a clear lake. Nothing. There is nothing in your mind. You only react. So the faster your reaction is because no thoughts. And so me being in that corner, there was no thoughts. It was how do I block and defend and get out of there? It wasn't what I was going to do. It was about what do I see and how do I get out instantaneously. So that's the best, as far as fear, yes. How do we get rid of fear? Fear is not about winning and losing. You have to go beyond fear. Yes, if you worry about getting hit, you will. So when I decided to become a better fighter, I would take on all green belts, brown belts. It didn't matter what color belt. And I would fight them on my opposite side of my body. So if my best side was my left, I went to my right. And I would tie one hand behind my back. And of course, what would a green belt do if they fought a black belt? And they hit them. They would run around like Rocky Balboa with their hands in the air. All right. But I became humble. The more humble you become, the better fighter you'll become. So I worked on all my weaknesses. Whatever my weakness was, I worked on it. So I could fight left side, right side. It didn't matter. And I didn't care about getting hit because I already was hit. I was hit by a green belt.
Yes, sir. That's some great stories so far. I only have a couple more questions for Master Manculich. If anybody watching on Facebook, there are a couple of those I want to ask as well. But if anybody has any other questions, go ahead and put them out there. So a couple more questions I have. You talked a little bit about challenges and weaknesses and overcoming that. You say, a lot of us say, what's your greatest accomplishment? Becoming a master in the association. So maybe outside of that, are there any, what would you say is your greatest accomplishment over the years that you're proud of?
Boy, those are tough after almost 50 years. I got a lot, and people come back to you and they say things. And especially when a student comes back after 10 or 15 years and they just published a book and they tell you how important you were in their life. But I guess I'll list just one or two in particular. My son started training at 3, and he made black belt when he was 11 or 12. And to see him out on that floor and performing and testing and passing was definitely really, really important. And I had a special student named Paul. He was a Mongoloid. And Paul never won anything. I trained him personally, physically on the side. I didn't train him in a classroom. And his mom always wanted him to win a medal in the Special Olympics. And she said, if you could do that, that would be awesome. So, Mongoloids don't have balance. They don't have a whole lot of anything. And to see Paulie, kick and on one leg and hit the heavy bag and do all sorts of things. And so one day his mom come in and she said to me, Paulie won 6 gold medals. She said, I couldn't thank you enough. And so those are just a couple incidences where, and I thanked her for her son. I said, without your son or my son, in my life, how they made a difference and how I became a different teacher by teaching them. I said, I'm a better teacher because of your son and my son. I says, I couldn't be here where I am today without them. And those are probably, and also breaking that board in front of Honky. That was important.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. So another question I like to ask everybody, just to kind of maybe humanize us to other people. Are there any interests, activities, hobbies, knowledge, etc., outside of the martial arts? Maybe something people don't know about you that you'd like to share with the group?
It's funny. Martial arts is my life, and my family. So I'm devoted to martial arts and I'm devoted to my family. And my wife has a cute little thing, she goes, when our sons grow up, at 18, they're supposedly an adult and they leave. She goes, does the martial arts make it to 18 and leave? So she says it's 39 years and counting. That's how long we've been married. But no, it's martial arts is my life. And then when I have a spare moment, if I'm not doing something around the house, I have thousands of books. I have a huge library and I sit down and I read. Knowledge is knowing that you don't know. And I work on it constantly. I don't rest on my laurels. I do not.
I definitely believe that's true from knowing you over the years, sir. So absolutely. So maybe outside the martial arts, you've talked about a lot of the jobs you've had over the years, and that is a question that's on Facebook. What's been your favorite job over the years, whether it's being something from being a bouncer or something from being an accountant or anything in between? What's your favorite job been over the years?
Wow, that's a good question. Being an accountant for a long time, I liked accounting. I think God has a plan, and of course He steers us. And so I worked in government. I tried to make a difference in government, and I can't really just pinpoint, in being a bouncer. I mean, all of it was dealing with people and different kinds of people, and a good client, bad client, a good drunk, a bad drunk, so I was always a people person. So I honestly, as a track coach, I also working in wrestling, volleyball coach on a collegiate level. I'm just a people person trying to make a difference in people's lives, working in senior centers. So I'm just a people person. That's what it comes down to.
Sir, thank you. So one other question, I talked to Master Manculich about this, but a lot of people have seen I interviewed Master Robinson, and the first thing out of Master Robinson's mouth when I got online with him was, "Are you going to interview Master Manculich?" I was like, yes, I would like to, sir. So eventually we got that to work out. I'm not going to get into all the details, but there was a question on Facebook. The reason I bring that up is, do you have a favorite story about Master Robinson from over the years?
Oh, yes, I do. Master Robinson and I have traveled to many, many, many black belts, many regional clinics, and we were out at Region 5 at Ohio State University, and it was a Sunday, and, it's done. And thank God, Ohio State out there in Columbus, you got 8 lanes, and we were in passing lane, next to the guardrails there, and the passenger side rear tire blows out, and we have almost no room to change the tire. And as the cars are whizzing by, and of course we don't have a full-size tire, we have a donut. And Master Robinson, everybody knows he's a nurse. He is telling me, as I'm trying to change the tire, what the actual statistic of people living and dying. And he said only 20% of people that change tires live. I will tell you, NASCAR and Indianapolis pit crews had nothing over me that day. Nothing.
That's a good story.
I have never changed a tire so fast and scared in my life. It worked.
It's motivation, right, sir?
I was totally motivated. Trust me.
Sir, all right. Touched on a lot of things, and then my last kind of question is kind of open-ended. Whether there's any experiences you've had over the years, any closing comments, words of wisdom, stories, etc., that you'd like to share with the group today before we head out, sir? Just leave
Yeah, I
it
have
up
a
to you.
quote. I'll give you a quote, but I just would love people to get back to basics. You know, every instructor I ever trained under, including, you know, what was fun about people would ask me, you know, I spent 18, 20 years every Sunday, get up at 5 in the morning, get to Region 8 instructors class by 9, you know, train from 9 to 2 or 3, maybe leave by 4 or 5, come home and be home by 10. And I did that for almost 20 years, you know, once a month. And, you know, Grandmaster Shin, they say, well, what's it like training with him? I says, basics. They go, do you do anything fancy? I went, no, basics. They go, like what? I said, low block, high block, front kick. And he corrects us. And they went, well, you're high rank. I said, he corrects us. I says, so every instructor I ever had was about basics. And so if you don't do basics well, doing some, you know, obviously an advanced technique is just a combination of a basic. So if you don't have a solid foundation, it doesn't matter what you do in an advanced technique, it's not going to work. So from Grandmaster Shin, you know, his basic, basic, basic. One more time. If you can hear that in the back of your head, one more time. That's Grandmaster Shin, you know, and he meant it, you know, and so, and he would move your hand maybe a quarter inch, or he maybe move your knee a quarter inch, and you're looking like, that's it. But that was more perfect than what you were doing. And that's the kind of thing we have to get back to, basic, and not worry about winning. And I think if you can get that in your head and listening to the instructors, you know, if you come to class with an attitude and your teacher's up there teaching, guess what? Nothing is going to sit in your head because you know why? You got an attitude. So if your cup is full when you enter, you ain't going to get much. It's all going to just roll off. As Grandmaster Shin used to say, we're all white belts, empty your cup, get rid of that ego. You know, when you think about all the old martial artists, what they do, they try to destroy their ego. They did the most humblest thing, whether you looked at Funakoshi or the Koreans, they would do something that was menial, cleaning bathrooms. You know what I mean? They were out there doing stuff that, no, you can't do that, Sensei. Oh, yes, I can. And so they kept themselves humble because people were worshiping them, and they didn't want that. They didn't want their head to get ahead of them. They wanted to be humble and keep it humble. That's when your technique is the best, is when you're humble, not when you're thinking. If you think about yourself, obviously you're not thinking about the attack. You're going to get hit. That's just so simple. You know, so I would just say, please practice the basics, listen to your instructor, you know, and I'm going to read this. This is from, although it's Japanese, it's from Nakayama Sensei, and I like it. And this is very purposeful for today. The purpose of karate is not winning of fights or tournaments. The true purpose of karate is to perceive the truth of life through daily training and to gain self-confidence and self-reliance. I think that's a little heavy, but also karate is like climbing a series of stairs or steep steps. As the mind and body grow together, the student moves continuously onward and upward, one step at a time. The process is endless because no one is perfect. Karate is attained one step at a time, and so is life. Just train every day and try your best, and the truth will come to you.
Wow, I certainly don't have anything to add to that. That's a profound statement. So I just want to thank Master Manculich for sharing with us today and being online with us today. There's, like I said, a ton of great history there, a lot of great stories, philosophy, and advice. So appreciate your time, sir.
No, thank you.
Been a great experience, and I've learned a ton from working with Master Manculich over the years. So if you ever get a chance, definitely come up and say hi and take a session from Master Manculich if you ever get the opportunity. All right, so thank you, sir. Tang Su, and we'll close out our live stream here.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
Sir.